Hello, everybody, and welcome to episode number 247 of the Board Game Barrage podcast.
We're back in America.
I am your regular... What?
We're back in America.
We're back in America. That is true. If you felt our absence for the last week, like this air leaving this room...
The dollar dropped, I think, a couple pennies. As we're
Exactly. Yeah. That cool breeze you're now feeling, that's us back. That's
the rejuvenation of the nation, is what I like to call it.
Yes, there it is right there. Beautiful.
Did you guys get the sort of weird looks from the custom officials? You know, when you say, why are you in Canada? And you say, well, thank you for asking. I'm a guest of honor at a board game convention.
I just tapped my medal and it was like, is this clear enough?
Yeah.
Like,
oh, that gets through the metal detectors.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, interesting.
It's some sort of weird, barely metal composite, it turns out. Thanks for nothing, Board Game Geek. This week on the show, as we've just been talking about, we have been in and out of Vancouver at the Shut Up and Sit Down Expo, where we played a bunch of games. And we're going to be talking about all of the games that we had played in Vancouver. We've got to play a bunch of good stuff with some listeners of the show, but we'll get to that later. Before then, we're going to be talking about the games. Well, we'll be talking about some other games we can play, but the ones that we didn't necessarily play at Vancouver. Those being Village Rails, which Mark is going to tell us about, the Guild of Merchant Explorers by myself, and Kellen's going to tell us about Puzzle Strike 2. So let's kick it off with Mark and Village Rails.
Yeah, I recently got a chance to play Village Rails from Osprey Games, who provided us with a review copy. This is designed by Matthew Dunstan and Brett Gilbert, the same design team behind Elysian and Chocolate Factory. A couple of solid games that I enjoy to varying, although admittedly middling degrees, and both of which are incidentally available on BJ if you're interested in trying them out. They've also both designed solid games on their own, including Dunstan has designed Pioneer Days and Gilbert designed Mandala, among other titles from both of them. I didn't know quite what to expect from Village Rails. The title makes it sound like it might be a train game, maybe a la an 18XX, or more likely a cube rail game along the lines of Irish Gauge or Chicago Express or Ride the Rails. You got rails there right in the title. That thought starts to fall away when you see the box, though, which is quite tiny. It's maybe the size of 5 or 6 packs of playing cards stacked up together, give or take. What Village Rails is a condensed route builder with a touch of PAX Premier / PAX Renaissance / Century Spice Road market system mixed in.
Those are comparable games.
Those are all
the PAX Premier / Century Spice Road.
Very common genre.
Shared heritage, sort of the same parents.
You know one, you know the others. Yeah.
Yeah. They're sisters.
They're sister
Blood
games.
brothers.
Blood brothers, sister games.
Sisters.
In gaming.
Hey guys, do you know what's hard today?
What's that?
The kombucha I'm drinking.
This is going to be a fun episode. The way it works is pretty straightforward. To begin, each player is going to put these 2 strips perpendicular in their playing area, which are 3 cards length by 4 cards length long, which makes up a 3x4 space where you'll be putting the 12 cards you'll be placing through the course of the game. Every round, the one compulsory action is that you have to place 1 track card, meaning that each game consists of exactly 12 turns for each player, at which points your boards are all filled up and the game will end. The way
is that thematic? The compulsion delay track?
Yeah, I think that's like an inborn thing. If you work in the railroad industry, you have a compulsion delay track. Would you guess? That's what I would guess.
Thanks for clarifying.
You got it, no problem. So the way you acquire those track cards is going to a market system that's going to be instantly familiar with anyone who's played the games I mentioned earlier, the Sisterhood of Games, those being the PAX games or
Sisterhood of Blood Brothers.
That's right. Century Spice Road games. There's a row of cards. They're all track cards. And if you want the one on the end, it's free. But if you want anyone down the row, it requires you to put a coin on each card. Then you slide the row down. And when it comes to the next player's turn, if they want one that has a coin on it, they acquire all the coins that have accrued on it, meaning that card has been passed over a couple of times. In addition to that mandatory action of taking a track card and laying it in your 3x4 grid, you can also buy what's called a trip card. The trip cards have the same sort of row. They're a little bit smaller rows. There's only about 3 options in every game, and you acquire them the same way, with the caveat being that no matter which card you buy, you have to pay an additional 3 coins. So there may be coins that accrue on it, but you always pay an additional 3 coins. You can affix the trip cards to any of the 7 slots that make up your 4x3 grid. So you have this 4x3 grid, and so each spot on the grid, the top 3 and the side 4, represent one trip that you'll be filling out by laying all the track down. So these trip cards will give you some sort of condition to meet, and if you meet the condition, you'll score points once that trip is completed. In addition to that, the one other type of card in this game, and there aren't very many components, again, the box is quite small in and of itself, are what's called terminus cards. These are cards that are going to be one way of getting money back in the game. Every time you complete a route, in addition to scoring it, you will be selecting one of the 3 terminus cards in your hand. That will give you money based on a condition. And so if you meet the condition to the maximum, you'll get up to 10 coins. Every card, no matter what, will give you 3 coins. And so every time you complete a track, you will cash one of those in, giving you money, giving you income, and then you'll draw back up to 3. So you'll always have 3 of these terminus cards in your hand. You never buy them. You just always have a hand of 3. And that's basically how the game works. Whenever you lay a track down in such a way that it goes from one of the edges of the strips that you've laid down to the ends of the 4x3 area that you've constructed, that is considered like a completed route, and then you'll be scoring. The way you score are for icons that are on the track. There are icons that give you points based on the type of environment they're in. There's like lakes and fields and different types of things, and some of the cards will give you points based on the number of those tracks that are on. Some will give you points based on just a amount of points that are on the track. So if you lay a track down with, I think they're called stops, they will have a point total on them, and you'll get that point total when you complete the track. There's also a set collection aspect to it, where if you complete a track with 4 of a specific symbol, you'll get 25 points. If you do it with 3 of a symbol, you'll get 18, then 6, then 0. And so that's another way to score, by having these specific symbols on a specific route. Those are quite hard to construct because each completed trip can be quite small. It can be as small as 1 card, as long as maybe 7, but the cards are designed in such a way that the track will never double back. It's always heading toward an exit. You can sort of delay it a little bit to put more cards down, but generally you're pushing towards the end, and there's no complication of, oh, my track is doubling back, and now which way does it split? Everything's very clear. The route building is simplified so that that is not a consideration. That being said, there are a lot of considerations to make in this game in terms of how you're going to score. You're balancing, again, the things that are printed on the card along with these trip cards, again, that you can elect to buy and place out. That is another big source of points. And so you start thinking to yourself, okay, this trip card is going to give me points if I have more forest tracks than any other. Am I going to be able to synergize this with the tracks that are available on the market? And so it's a game where your first couple turns will be a minute or two, and then especially if you're AP prone, this is a game where, although the decision space is pretty tight because you only have sort of the market of track tiles and the market of these trip cards, you start thinking to yourself, oh, there's got to be a way to maximize this even more than I'm thinking, and you start making all these calculations. And so it felt to me, after playing it, like a game that it didn't go very long. I want to make it clear that this is not a game that's going to drag out for, I think, an hour tops is as long as it's going to go. But it is a game that can be very AP prone, and so people who are inclined to really math out every turn are going to perhaps fall in that trap. But it felt like a game to me that might be really benefited by something like a chess clock, something along those lines. But again, the counterpoint to that is it is a quick game. It is 12 turns per person. I will say that I enjoyed Village Rails more than I actually expected, given the size of the box and given that it was a pretty straightforward route builder. The route building is there. It's an important part of the game, but it's not complicated. The track building is very straightforward, but there are a lot of interesting choices to make. It sort of feels like a game that is sort of on the verge of a filler game to a more meaty game. It's right on sort of that line. I don't know what the legs on this game are going to look like, because I feel like it might be something where you feel like you have seen everything after a couple of plays, but there certainly are at least a couple of plays, at least for me, in this game. And again, approachable, easy to teach, and relatively quick.
So it's like the small card game, but that description was a lot, it seems like.
Yeah.
So is it like 4 arboretums duct taped together in complexity, or is it like on a scale of arboretum to,
I would
it's
say
a lot more than arboretum?
it might be a little bit more in terms of like the rules, because Arboretum you just have the cards and you're discarding them and pulling up. Here you have 3 types of cards that you have to consider, but I don't think it's as brain burny to me as Arboretum.
Okay.
And maybe that's because Arboretum always feels like when you sacrifice something, you're giving something to opponent, and it's much tougher for me to get through that. And for some people, the ability to see all these options and to think there's got to be a more efficient way, there's got to be more scoring, that might make it a tougher game for them. But yeah, there is some of that. It's a bang for the box winner here. Small box, but a lot of burn in there.
A lot of banging.
A lot of banging in that box.
This wouldn't necessarily be like a criticism for myself, but does it have moments where you feel like you're getting one over in other players by like, taking options away from them?
Yes, and that is where, if you're looking for interaction, you can find it in this game in that specific way. It requires you maybe playing the game in a more, for lack of a term, try-hard way than most people will want to, but you can definitely see that, hey, this trip card, this scoring card, really works for this player, and despite the fact that it maybe doesn't work great for me right now, I'll take it just to keep it from them and maybe like work towards making it work for myself. So there is little drops of that if you want to exploit are definitely there. But I don't think, if you're looking for a lot of conflict or a lot of interaction, maybe not so much.
Okay, Mark. So my question is this like a cinematic universe for Osprey? Like, didn't they just release a Village game from Pierre Sylvester like last year? Village Green, I think it was called.
I think that is a sister game. I have not played it. I believe it also has the market or row thing, or maybe it has, I know there's some shared DNA. I think it maybe is the 3x4 grade, something like that. But yeah, there is some similarity. I'm not familiar with it enough to know, but yeah, I think you're on the right track.
Well, we should do like a naming exercise. This is my favorite part of my job, where we just sit there and try to name future video games.
Okay.
So, we have a constraint, right? And the constraint breeds creativity. Mark, I don't know if you know that. You're not a very
creative person.
So we start with Village. No, I was told not to insult you anymore, so I didn't finish the sentence. You finished it, so thank you for finishing that.
You got it.
But it's Village something. So if you just want to tweet at Osprey Games, if you have a great idea for what would go after the word Village, you have our permission to tweet directly at them.
Yeah, so it'd be third in the series of Village Green, Village Rails, and then Village left to you.
Village Idiot, presumably.
Apocalypse.
Yeah. Speaking of name-generated board games, the Guild of Merchant Explorers, perhaps one of the most generic names for a board game ever. I've actually been slightly buzzing because by a massive coincidence, this is another game in the Sisterhood of Blood Brothers. It is by Matthew Dunstan and Brett J. Gilbert.
Oh, wow, okay.
What are the odds?
Literally the same.
Wait, the same people?
Is literally the same people, and I promise you that is just entirely coincidence.
Funny.
This is another review copy sent to us by Alderac Games. The Guild of Merchant Explorers is sort of in that genre that I think is best described as roll and write adjacent, except you're neither rolling nor writing, you are flipping and placing. So you can have a small deck of cards.
Why don't you just call it a flipping place?
Yeah, it's a flipping place. It's a flipping place. You're going to have a small deck of cards at the start of the game of just about 6 different terrain types depicted on them. Every player has an identical map of this sort of sprawled out, generic fantasy world where you have a city in the middle and different terrain spreading in different directions. You have an ocean, you have deserts, grasslands, mountains, and every one of these cards that you flip on any given turn is going to depict one of those terrain types, and we'll say like, okay, place 1 of your cubes in the mountains, or place 2 of your cubes in the grasslands. You flip one of those cards over and everyone simultaneously chooses how to place these cubes. Now, the cubes can only be placed adjacent to where you previously have, let's call it infrastructure, which at the start of the game is just this one point at the middle of the board. You then expand outwards from that, trying to get to coins, which are victory points, trying to establish trade routes, which are going to be, again, ways to get more points. Reaching the 4 corners of the map establishes these towers, which give ever-increasing points. There are little bonus spots you uncover, which will let you draw from a deck. So lots of little goodies spread across your map. But the key gimmick here is once you get through that small deck of having placed, some spots on the sea, some spots on the grass, some spots on the mountain, all of your cubes will wipe away at the end of that round. But any villages that you've placed will persist. Now, you place villages by filling out regions of land, so there is some incentive to sort of fully cover these specific terrain type regions. Once you do that, you place a village, and these can now become new starting points for subsequent rounds. So those are the only things that persist from round to round.
It's a little bit morbid, right? Because you sort of send people out into the wilderness to explore the map, and then if they don't make a village, they all die of dysentery. And then you must go back to the last village that you were in.
4 times a game, a massive apocalypse just decimates half of the island. It's pretty sad when you think about it. But one more little twist on this is that every player also is going to get a special, very powerful bonus card that they're going to play in the round. So the first time one of these cards comes out, everyone draws 2 cards. And these are by far the most powerful cards in terms of placement. Some of them are allowing to place 4 or 5 cubes with different preconditions, like, 4 along the sea in a straight line, or 4 within a given region, or place 4 in any order of mountains and sea. It's just like fun little powers that are going to be unique to you. And when that card comes up at a future point during the game, you just trigger that power again and again. Because then what happens when you go into round 2, you take all those cards, you add another card that is a second tier 2, let's call it, bonus card. You shuffle those all together and you redeal. So you kind of know what's going to come out in every subsequent round. But the puzzle is in not knowing exactly the order that they're going to come out in, or what your bonus card is going to be for round 2 and 3. You do this for a total of 4 times, slowly, encroaching on more and more of the lands. You get your villages further afield, completing all these objectives I previously mentioned. In addition, in sort of true roll and write style, you have goals that you're working towards, where the first person to get that goal gets X number of points, and every other player that gets there after them gets half as many points. You do that for the 4 rounds, and that's the whole game. You tally up your points, and that's how it works.
Oh, can I explain the player interaction, Neelan?
Yeah, please, Callan, please.
When you take a turn that you're happy about, you get to look at your opponent.
Oh, man. I mean, those are some of my favorite parts, Like, I'd physically place my cube, and I would just look up, and in sheer joy spreading over my face, like watching what Callan's doing. It was some of the best time I've had spending time with my good buddy, Callan. What did you think of Guild Merchant Explorers, Callan?
I thought it was actually pretty good, to be honest.
Yeah.
It's totally fine. I was thinking, they have those AI image generators that are happening right now. And I bet that if you fed the first half of your rules explanation into the AI generator, it could generate the rest of the game, because it sort of has everything that you think it does with the goals, the first place, the second place, then, the exponential scaling if you get to the 4 corners of the board, the difference between going a little out of your way to get coins now or to connect for a bigger route. I think that the joy here is twofold. One is in the people dying of dysentery, because it does change what you have to do, and there's a little bit of tension when you get near the end of a round, because you're like, I need to form a village or all of this work will have been in vain. So it's like an expedition into the northeast corner. Does actually feel stressful in a way that was surprising to me. And then I said the tension was twofold, and now I only have one prong of tension.
One-fold.
No. But very pleasant. I think the powers that you get, the unique powers, feel like wildly overpowered, which is like exactly what you want. I just felt like it is hard. I've only played it once, Neil, and I know you've played it quite a bit more. I think that I felt like my cards were way better than yours, and I did win.
Yes, you did. But I do think that it's exactly that. Like, everyone thinks that about their cards. Because, often you'll draw your 2 cards and just be like, oh my god, this is so good. Then you look at the other one and like, oh my god, this one's so good. And it's genuinely a tough choice between the 2 of them. And meanwhile, everyone around the table is having that moment, because everyone by round 2 has branched off in slightly different directions. So what you actually need from those powers is pretty different depending on what you're working towards. It also does the smart thing of giving you pretty much 5 or 6 independent objectives that you could be working towards, whether it's the trade routes, whether it's just mining coins, getting villages out, working towards the objectives, the towers. And they're not mutually exclusive of each other, but there is this thing of, okay, if I go up in this direction, I can cover 2 of these bases versus, sacrificing, maybe I won't do the ruins in this game if I didn't want to go out of my way to get those. So there are fun options. And then you lay on top of that, there are a bunch of different maps that come in into the base game. I think 4 in total in the base game. And they add different rules, different layouts. Some of them are more just like a series of connected islands. One of them that I remember playing had just like lava across the map, which was like impossible terrain. So yeah, there's fun stuff in there. The powers feel different each time you play it. It doesn't overstay its welcome. It's about 30 minutes, I would say, is probably about how long our game took. And it's a pretty simple teach. So very pleasant. I've enjoyed all my plays of this. It's maybe a little bit too pricey, a little bit too big of a box, but it's a lovely thing.
It's like if I didn't have Welcome to and Cartographers, I could see me recommending this over them, depending on the context for someone. But if you have 5 roll and writes or 4 or 5, it's like, I don't think you're going to play this one and go like, aha, this is the one that has changed my mind on this. But rock solid and a good, easy recommendation in 2022.
Yeah, that is the Guild of Merchant Explorers by Alderac Games.
All right, Kellen, what's your Dunstan Gilbert game?
Well, we could say Puzzle Strike 2 is a sister game to Puzzle Strike 1.
True.
Huh?
That's very true.
We could say that. Puzzle Strike 2 is a review copy that was sent to us from Serlin Games, so we now have 3 review copies. I don't know that that's ever happened either.
That doesn't happen before either.
First ever. This is...
We made it.
Stupendous. For those who don't know, Serlin Games is a purveyor of weird games. Funny enough, for our topic from last week, you may have heard of Yomi, which is a weird take on rock, paper, scissors that people love. You may have heard of Codex, which is a weird RTS card game that many people love. You may have heard of Puzzle Strike 1, which is a take on Dominion, but using discs? What do they call them? Not cards, but chips, thank you, and not the kind that you eat. There are a few other weird takes. I believe he has a poker game about pandas called Pedante, and I believe he has a riff on a Reiner Knizia game called Flash Duel. I follow Serlin Games somewhat, I wouldn't use the word religiously. I don't follow anything religiously. But he is known for competitive balance, updating his games. Puzzle Strike came out, I believe it was 3 times. Puzzle Strike 1st edition, 2nd edition, 3rd edition, and now here we are in Puzzle Strike 2, which is a separate game almost entirely. But the sort of core, the root of this is taking the fun of deck building, taking the fun of Dominion, and then combining it with a genre of video games I'm not ultra familiar with, but Puzzle Fighter, and sort of a matching icons in a puzzle game to send blocks over to the opponent that they now then have to deal with. You may have heard us talk about this. A previous game from level 99, Bullet, is also sort of a riff on this mechanism. But imagine that you're playing Dominion, except you have this giant row of gems in front of you, and you're trying to find a way to flip them around and then crash them over to your opponent so that the opponent has a bunch of crap that they have to deal with. And the way that the game works is you actually lose the game if at the end of your turn your gem pile is higher than 10. But what's interesting is that the tension of the game twists and ramps as that stack gets higher and higher, because when it's low, your card draw is lower and your ability to attack is lower. And the higher that gem pile goes, the risk reward increases. You're drawing more cards on your turn and you're able to attack more violently. So the nature of the game is Dominion style. You start a game with 10 cards, 7 of which are same for every game, and 3 of which are a character. There's a lot of asymmetry in Serlin Games, and in this case, there are a bunch of his characters from sort of the extended universe of chibi anime art, and they come in the form of a 3-card flavor. And then there is bespoke decks that are sort of a market row that comes out. There is so much in this game that it is probably not going to be described super eloquently or well. But again, the cards that you have in sort of your base deck are flipping 2 gems in your row or crashing gems, which is the function of sending them to your opponent. And there is a market row that is determining what color the gems are coming into to your opponent's board. So it makes buying in this game much different and more interesting, perhaps, than a Dominion game, because not only are you focused on what card you need for your deck building, but you're focused on what color those cards are, because that's the way that those gems are going to fall on your opponent's pile. So you definitely do not want 3 of one color in that card row, and you probably don't even want 2 of that color in the card row. In addition to that, you are fighting over the most garish board game component I have ever seen.
I was going to ask you about this, yeah.
Let me stop. Literally the most garish board game component I've ever seen. It is a magic wand that is huge, takes up about half the box. When Neelan and I opened the box today to play this game, which we played a few times, it was lit up and flashing lights were flashing. I don't know how long it's been on in the box, but it was on when we opened the box. And one player has the scepter. And so there's this idea in the game where if you hold the scepter, in a 4-player game, everyone is attacking you and you are attacking everyone, a la King of Tokyo, sort of a King of the Hill. But in a 2-player game, the longer you squeeze the scepter, the more you're powering up your super abilities, but the less flexibility you have in how gems crash down onto your board, and the less you can use these shield tokens, which prevent you from sort of taking damage. So high risk, high reward as you hold onto the scepter that you might want to yield it at the perfect time. This is a game of tempo. This is a game of heavy, heavy tactics. Things are changing, things are moving, things are flying. You think it's insurmountable. You think you cannot win. You have a pile of 20 gems coming. But you know what those gems represent if you can get rid of them? Opportunity. Those gems represent opportunity because you're about to f*** up Neelan with 20 gems worth of stuff. I feel like I'm doing a disservice to the game. There's a lot and a little. If you're familiar with Dominion, you sort of are taking a gem row, adding it to that, combining it with asymmetry. There's these different market decks, which are really cool. So I believe the base game comes with 2. I could be wrong, but there's an expansion that comes with like 4 more, with a ton of more characters. There's a lot going on here and a lot to love. You can lose the game in 3 turns. Literally, if you hold the scepter like a dumbass, game's over in 3 turns. But the sort of swings of tempo were perhaps some of the biggest I've ever seen in this style of game. It is not a game of increments where it goes back and forth. It's like, holy Neelan's not going to be able to do this. And then if he does it, that actually just shoves it all on Kellen. And it just ramps up and up and up as you go. Neelan, what did you think of Puzzle Strike 2?
Yeah, I think that specific feeling of just, you know, there's incredibly high peaks and valleys where you just have these turns that you look at the start of your turn and you're just like, yeah, no, I think this is game over, Kellen. But then you start to look at it for like, you know, a couple of seconds more and you think, well, no, hang on, like I can slide this gem over here, I drop this one down, and then, oh, if I play this card, then that actually slides those ones out. This all slides down in a satisfying way. So, like, you're working out slowly, like, the machinations you can do to turn what does look really insurmountable into just what feels like you just managed to scrape by. And that always feels really, really good. And then, like Helen said, that often means that if you're able to recover from a turn like that, you've just set your opponent up for an equally challenging turn. So there's a lot of those little fun manipulations. I do think that it felt a lot of the time like it rode on stuff that was out of my control. Like, what was the color of the ante this round? What was the order of the gems? Did I draw a couple of cards that happened to be particularly helpful for me this round, or did I not? And those swings, while they felt like a pretty unique puzzle every turn of the game, it often felt like when you had those big plays or were able to pull them off, it sometimes felt a little bit like, okay, I saw through the puzzle, but did I really engineer myself in a way that made this possible? Or did I just manage to like work through the mess of what my hand was and what my board state was in order to come out on top? And I think the biggest issue I had with this is what that often feels like is you're just watching your opponent work through effectively a solo puzzle. And the thing I said to Kellen even at the time, like, that wasn't unfun. Like, it was, you're almost like in it together, just like watching, being like, can you get through this? I don't think you can. And then as you're piecing it together, it's like really satisfying to like watch unfold. But that also means there's a lot of downtime between turns, even in a 2-player game. It would often feel like each of our turns was, 5 to 10 minutes long as we just worked through all of the possibilities to see if we could get out ahead. And that kind of felt like a lot in the context of what it should be, in my mind, like a zippy 2-player back and forth game. It doesn't help that I can't help but compare it to Bullet Heart, as Kellen mentioned, like their games are playing in the same space. But that's maybe a pretty unfair comparison because that's a real-time game that really does move quite quickly, but it's certainly not helped by the comparison, I don't think.
Yeah, I think I like this more than you, but Mark, what's your question?
I'm looking at it as you guys are describing it, and the playing time is advertised as 20 to 30 minutes, and I'm wondering if...
I don't think anyone took 10-minute turns just to be...
That's probably...
Well, Neelan takes very long turns. No,
I would say some of them came close, though.
I think that things start really like nesting, okay, where it's like a card has 2 icons on it and you start on the icon on the left and then that triggers your ability to play like 6 more cards. Like, for instance, there's one of these decks was called Birthday Party, which was amazing because I had like what kind of animal did I have? A party
pelican.
I had a party pelican that helped me with the new economy in this specific deck, which was gifts. And the gift symbol, which is like so fun, right? It's like just fun on the face of it, is flip a card off the top of your deck and you must use it and it costs 0.
Okay.
And so I had all these cards with like double gifts on them. And so I'm just like YOLOing it, which is super fun. But imagine like you nest that within another card, which is like take 2 gifts. And then you're like, okay, you're flipping cards. And then that's triggering super abilities that you got to figure out. The structure can go quite deep where like you almost need a chart to figure out where you're at in the process. But I will say like Sirlin Games makes interesting games that don't really feel like a whole lot else. I think Bullet is definitely the best comparison, but I think this is so much more of a game. For lack of a better word, real-time games are a different beast entirely. I really like Puzzle Strike 2. I have the expansion in here, and there's 4 new decks. There's like 10, 15, 20 characters. I would love to just sit through and sort of goof off with these, but it does feel like sillier than perhaps I was expecting, rather than like tactical. And for what it's worth, Puzzle Strike 1 is quite good as well, a game I've had for many years that is totally worth seeking out as well for a sort of a different take on Dominion with this sort of gem row that combines things in weird ways.
My biggest takeaway was actually genuine enthusiasm to try check out Puzzle Strike 1, because I'm not very aware of like what the differences are, but I was intrigued enough by the system to like see how it compared.
Yeah, I think a lot of the like ideas are the same, but I don't think the execution is very similar. And the last thing I will say is that I have, for the first time ever, I haven't done this yet, but I am going to like duct tape or cover up the box for this game. So, you know, Neelan is not a very kind person, as any listener of the show will know. So like he has 2 spaces in his garage, but he hasn't allowed me to park there yet. Which, you know, I don't understand why, so I'm asking him here now. But so I had to park fairly far away today, which is like the first time this has happened. And this is the only game I was bringing in. And I was so embarrassed. I passed like 17 people as I was walking. I was hugging the game box so that the front of the cover no one could see. It looks like Lisa Frank is there, you know, crazy colors. It's super pink. I don't mind the colors, but it looks like, I mean, I don't even think I can say on the show what it looks like. It looks like I'm not lying. Like, it literally like looks like
it reminded me of like a Barbie playset in terms of just that garish hot pink and then like that plastic scepter. It's an odd thing.
I think it's intentionally bad. And that is a review copy from Sirlin Games of Puzzle Strike 2. Mark, I think you'd like this.
Yeah, it looks crazy. How long do you think the games go? I'm curious.
I think that, again, there's a little bit of annoyance with the setup. I think a 2-player game is definitely sub 30 when you're good at it. Definitely.
That sounds fun. It does sound fun.
There's a little bit of just like procedure to the turn, which just took a little while to get down, which made the first game especially just seem slower, I think.
No, I agree. There's a bittiness to like you're constantly moving down your row. Like, if all of it was tracked for you, or we could play this on BGA, I actually feel like we would be exploring it more.
I can see that. Before we move on with the rest of the show, just in the middle here, I want to thank everyone for their generous support over on patreon.com/BoardGameBarrage. This is one of the ways that you can support the show. We put out bonus episodes on Patreon every month. So typically these are folks on the stuff that, you know, is not our typical coverage for the podcast. So we're talking about books, we're talking about shows, things are just going on in our lives. So if you just want like a little bit of extra about what's happening in our lives outside of the board game world, we just put out our bonus episode for the month of September, and you can check that out at boardgamebarrage.com/Patreon or patreon.com/boardgamebarrage. There are some other fun little benefits in there, particularly if you're in our Discord. Please check it out. We would really appreciate that. One more thing I want to mention is that our Ghost Turkey event has officially kicked off. This is our version of a community Secret Santa event, so if you want to receive and more importantly give a gift to someone else in the community, you can head on over to the Ghost Turkey channel in our Discord at boardgamebarrage.com/Discord. This is like one of my favorite things in the year, and I'm so happy to be running it again this year. Love to see everyone take part. Let's get into the meat of the episode, the feature presentation. We played a bunch of games, and we're going to talk about them. What we're going to kind of do is just work through our weekend, just like a little sort of a walk down memory lane of our weekend at SHUX. And we kind of kicked this off with a fun little game that we played with Mark Bigney, the better boys. Mark, of So Very Wrong About Games.
The better
This
Mark.
was Master Word.
Yes. And so had you guys played this before? I know Mark had not.
I had not.
I had.
Oh, you had?
Yeah, I played this a couple of games, and I thought it was, I'm going to say, fine to good. Not amazing, was my hot take.
I had played this for the world to see on game night, so in case you're interested in watching me play it,
what?
You can go to YouTube and go to the BGG's Game Night series and look for Masterword. You can see me playing it there expertly as I played it with the rest of these folks in person.
Why did they invite you?
Because they needed someone who was a linguistic master. A master of words, you might say.
I wasn't considered?
No, you were not. You were not. You were not on the list.
Okay, master word is like mastermind, which is to say that one player has a word, and then the rest of the teams are sort of putting clues out and in a row related to that word, and the mastermind has to put out how many of those clues match with the category. So, if the word is donut, players can put things like whatever they want. Like, is it a country? Is there a clue?
You get a starting one, yeah. So that there is like a clue
category
attached to each card. Yeah, that is just broadly like food.
And then people were like large, specific, sugary. And then the clue giver has to put down how many thumbs up are related to that. And then you do that 7 times. And by the end of it, you have to use these special cards to have guessed the word specifically. So it has a really weird style of, I don't know if it's deduction or induction, and a tryhard can tell me which kind it is, of cooperative wordplay that I actually found really great. This was also like a game that SHUX was giving away to people. So it was one of the games that, they hand you a pile of games as you walk in and you go, great, now what am I going to do with this pile of games? I don't want them. But I'm excited to have Masterword, and I think I'm taking it home for Christmas for the family. Everyone knows what games is Kellen going to take home and play with his brother. I think Masterword is totally great.
Yeah, I agree completely. I really enjoyed it. It was one of the highlights of the con for me. Just like when I was a clue giver, the category was a place, and so it was Mark, a couple of his friends, and Kellen and Nealon trying to figure it out. And it was just interesting. As the clue giver, you have this intense level of frustration when you hear them skirting around the ways that they could get to the clue. But it's funny because at first it was like, which hemisphere is it on? Is it a country? Mark Bigney, unsurprisingly, was suggesting that we ask if it was like a Westphalian state.
No one knew what that even meant, first of all.
But the thing was, they could have gotten it immediately if they'd asked if one of the tanks lived there, because in the end it was Las Vegas. And they did get there.
Weren't we convinced it was Hawaii for about half
for
a game?
very long time, yes. I enjoy the process of Masterword. The thing I'll just reiterate is the thing I said when I spoke about it earlier this year, maybe, is I just think that it comes at the tail end of a glut of much better word games, in my opinion. This is very hot on the heels of So Clover and stuff like that, which just feels so much more accessible and clean to me. I think that the thing that happens with Masterword a lot of the time is kind of that tension of, oh, if the master messes something up early, it just derails the whole thing, and that didn't really necessarily happen in our games, but I can see that being a problem.
If this is about bacon, I won't hear it, and I won't respond to it. Okay, this led to perhaps of the entire con, how when you have a little bit of social anxiety, you're just what should I say right now? We got into a huge debate about whether bacon constitutes a finger food or not, and I believe, if I recall correctly, I asked Tom live during the episode last week. So that's what I do is when in doubt, I just take questions from the podcast and then ask them to everyone in real life so I don't have to have real conversations with them. But in Masterword, I was the clue giver and it was bacon, and people, it was we got to packaged, we got to it's not that good for you, meat product. And the question was finger food. And of course, bacon is a finger food because only a heathen would use a knife and fork to eat bacon. And it was I had started World War III based on who I asked. I mean, maybe it's because we had left the country, and so I just needed to get back to my fellow statesmen.
The audience was behind you, though. When you asked the audience, there was like
I pulled
80%.
the audience. I pulled everybody. Yeah. That's what I'm saying. Anytime I don't know what to say, like, is bacon and finger food is now my sentence.
There you go.
And that was brought to you by Masterword. I agree, it's not perfect. It's not the best, but, if you're looking for a word party game, I think you could do a whole lot worse.
That is absolutely true. Absolutely true.
After that, Neil and I at least played a game of Sidereal Confluence with some listeners and Pia from Board Game Spam. I always go into games of Sidereal feeling some level of intimidation just because of you usually have a lot of people there. It's going to be generally an intense back and forth, everybody talking at the table at the same time. I always feel like I'm going to be confused by the rules when it comes to acquiring the technology cards and how that works. So I always feel like I need to be refreshed and stuff. But, and this is usually the case with Sidereal whenever I play it, I always end the game absolutely enjoying myself, really, really loving it. And this was no different. Once you start going with Sidereal, it just flows so smoothly. For a game of negotiation, it's just built so well to encourage negotiation, to make everybody feel like trades are mutually beneficial. So I really enjoyed our game of it.
Yeah, I think it's an absolute credit to the design that it seems to work equally well when you throw new players in it, even mixed with experienced players. Mark did decimate most of the table for what it's worth, so maybe that needs to be stated. But that said, all the new players had a good time, as far as they were willing to admit, at least. The game also didn't go overly long. Because it's primarily simultaneous play, it's consistently under 2 hours, even if you're playing with 6 players and most of that table is new. It's just a pretty unique experience that will feel different every time because it's so dictated by the people around the table.
It's funny how at conventions, I feel like the common feeling is I want to play the games that I don't get to play at home. And I feel like we're all pretty lucky to have big game groups that we can play games like this, because my instinct is to do the exact opposite, which is I didn't get enough sleep last night. I have a lot of people I need to talk to. How could I possibly devote that much brain power to Sidereal Confluence? But it did go less long than I expected. I went to the game hall and did a few demos while you yuck-fucks were playing Sidereal Confluence. I would have won, so it's probably an asterisk for Mark had I been there.
What did you play at the demo hall?
Funny you asked. I played a couple of games that are on Kickstarter or about to be on Kickstarter. I played a Tim Eisner game, a demo of Leaf. Tim Eisner, who made Canopy, a game Neil and I recently talked about, as well as March of the Ants, that Ant 4X game that we previously played. And Leaf is really pretty. It's insane. You're sort of combining Leaf's shapes of 5 different weird shapes with connecting points together. Depending on what colors you link up and then how many points those leaves meet, you get little actions that are fueling a collect animals and move up tracks economy. And the Kickstarter looks really pretty because the leaves are thick wood, I believe wood tiles. The prototype I played was not that. I only did a demo game. Wasn't my favorite game ever. Won't be backing the Kickstarter, but it is running right now. I think it fits well into the sort of nature-themed games that are coming out right now. And if you like puzzly, light games that you could probably play in an hour with a family, I think it's probably in that realm, but not for Kellen, let's say.
I love the art of these cards, though.
Yes, I know. The foxes and the owls. I agree.
It's got an old-style fairy tale book look to it that's really, really gorgeous.
And then the other one that I played is actually probably more in both of your wheelhouses. This was called Fit to Print. Fit to Print. Fit to Print. Can you guys say that?
Fit to Print.
Fit to Print.
So I'm the only one who has trouble saying that. You guys both said it like masters. I'm the
All
idiot.
the news that is fit to print is the motto of what newspaper?
And this is why you weren't invited to play Masterword.
Fit to Print. In this game, you are doing a real-time game a la Galaxy Trucker. You have, I believe, 4 minutes in the first round to pick up tiles blind from a group in the middle and then determine if you want them in your newspaper. And so you're putting pictures, advertisements, stories with sort of different conditions about what can be placed by what, So if these things are adjacent, you get more points. If these things are above the fold, you get more points. And then there are sort of round bonuses, or there's sort of positive and negative news stories, and you want to make sure that your news stories are more positive than negative. I think that my favorite system in the whole game is that at the end of the 3 rounds, whoever has the least advertisements overall cannot win the game. So it's like literally you must advertise, and it's just the case that you must advertise like as much as the other players, but no more, which I thought was really cute. The art is great, and the idea of sort of like a grid where you're arranging it based on like making a newspaper, I think is like really, really clever. Like people immediately get what's happening. I don't really like real-time games. This is not going to change anyone's mind, but I do think it was cute, great art, and I think it'll do really well on Kickstarter when it launches later this year.
Another game that we played is called Bumúntú. This is by Tim Blank and WizKids. And the way that this game starts out, you have this sort of huge grid of these little Scrabble tiles, like little azul, beautiful little plastic tiles with animals printed on the front of them. You're going to pick a random subsection of all of the animals in the game. And each of these animals has a different power, which dictates how your piece, if it's on that tile, will move. So at the start of your turn, you might spend some of these little chits to move around, and then you activate the tile you're on, moving in the very specific way that that tile allows you to move, and then adding that tile to your collection. And ultimately, it's about collecting groups of these animals because each of them scores differently. In fact, each of the animals scores according to this sort of ranked list. So the elephants at the start of the game might be the one scoring the most, and the crocodiles might easily be the one scoring the least. But the cool twist here is that one of the things you can do every so often is swap the positions of 2 of those animals on that list. So you're subtly nudging some animals to score better, and over the course of the game, sliding them down. So there's the sense that you know what is going to be strong at the start, but they're kind of gradually moving up and down over the course of the game based on people manipulating the score track. But other than that, it mostly feels like a fairly sort of abstract game of positioning yourself onto the right tiles to use the powers in a very particular way, to reposition yourself onto the next tile that you need, occasionally disrupting your plans of your players, pushing them around, that sort of thing. I thought this was cute. I kind of wish that the scoring conditions were a little bit more substantive, I guess I would say.
I agree with that. Yeah. I enjoyed it. I was hoping for a little bit more. I mean, there were certain points where the scoring does, like if your animal is at the top, then they're worth 2 points per tile, whereas most of the other scoring is whoever has the majority. So there is a little bit of a cliff there, but for the most part, the scoring differences did feel a little less consequential than I would have hoped for.
It's interesting, right? Because Bumúntú did something that Biblios could not do, which is that it promised that you would have these sort of changing and shifting values for things, and that was going to be an important part of the game. And Bumúntú succeeds, and Biblios failed. Doesn't have 2 phases.
I would argue the exact opposite.
Well,
scoring is consequential in Biblios and not as consequential in Bumúntú.
No, I mean, I think that what is super clear, right, because you're only allowed to switch the position of 2 things right next to each other. I thought that was the good element of it, because you know that crocodiles, if they start at number 1, are not going to get to the bottom one, because it would take every single tile for that to happen. Sure. So you sort of heuristically know these animals are probably going to be worth more than these animals. I thought this was really fun. I think that it's probably weird because it's very tactical for how abstract it is. And so the people who are like, oh my God, I love abstract puzzles are going to be annoyed at what's happening in this, but it's also got a wonderful presentation.
Yeah.
There's a really pretty looking game, and one that, you know, people would come over and be like, oh, what are you playing? Like, it's fun to see it set up. Not too many components. I like this one, I think, more than you guys did.
And a nice thin box. I like a thin box.
I did like it. I just wished it was better, I guess is maybe the best way I could describe it. Like,
yeah, you wish it was thicker, more satisfying.
Exactly. But yeah, then, Mark, do you want to tell us about...
Yeah, sure. I kept up my habit of thinking outside the box. I started this with Flick Fleck earlier, and if you want to hear more about Flick Fleck, listen to last week's episode. But again, thought outside the box. I went with a game from 2015, Nitro Glyxerol. Yeah, Nitro Glyxerol. Easy to say. This is a dexterity game. And so the way it works is you have this beaker thing in front of you. It's like a 3-dimensional like beaker thing. And it's got little like spots in it that are like blockers. And you've got 5 colored cubes that start in the sort of leftmost bottom corner of your beaker. And then cards are played out at random of each of the 5 colors. So it might be like green, purple, red, yellow, blue. Okay. And that order is going to be different every time. And what you do at the same time, you start every...
What's an example of another order?
Red, green, purple, blue, yellow.
Wow, on command you can do that. Good for you, Mark.
And so what you're trying to do is, at the same time, everybody is trying to manipulate their beaker, getting past these little blockers, and then trying to get the cubes to sort of line up on the edge in that order. So again, in the previous example, it would be green, purple, red, yellow, blue. And you do that as quickly as you can. And then you, either when you're done or when you think you might screw it up, you stop and you grab a card. And so in the 3-player game, the cards are 1, 2, 3. And then once everybody's done or the time runs out, you compare how accurately you've done it. So if it was green, purple, red, yellow, blue, and I start and I have my green right, and I have my purple right, but then I mess up the third one, I take the 2 cards for the green and purple, and they will give me points at the end of the game, and then we can see what the other players have done. We go to the person who finished second and see how accurately they did, and then they take cards and so on and so forth. Just a silly, fun game. It's the game that it sounds like, just frantic, trying to get things in order. I liked it. I'm always down for like a quick 20-minute dexterity game. This is a little bit unique.
I think you're burying the lead. Because one of us is a savant at this game.
That's true. The first round of this, Neil and I were struggling to get like 2 cubes in order, and Callan had already finished the entire thing, and it was ridiculous. It was crazy.
It's like literally those puzzles you played as a 5-year-old where they handed you a piece of plastic with a small rubber ball in it, and you had to get it in, not a rubber, the little metal ball, get it into the hole on the other side. It's that.
Yeah. Everybody loves that.
But board gamified.
Everybody loves it.
Yeah, I'm saying I trained for this for my whole life.
Okay, perfect.
Uh-huh. So after that, Callan introduced us to a little game called Bridge City Poker.
Yeah, so worth mentioning, this is a review copy for what it's worth. And I think the designer said that they sent us 2 review copies, but I think one was lost in the mail. So this is sort of an indie trick-taking, shedding-esque game where there are cards with superpowers in them. So I think it's sort of an advanced version of that. It's got lovely art. It is not Japanese. You might think I would want it because of that. My guess is that this game is perfect for people who are really, really, really into trick-taking, because some of the strategy is sort of just like you are drawing cards between turns. So some of the strategy is like pass to draw cards, to build better hands, to have insane turns. Yeah, we didn't love this, and I really wanted to, and it's hard to describe why that is. But like Mark won the first 2 rounds before any of us, including some members of Shut Up and Sit Down, had any time to like think or react. It felt like we had taken like 3 turns and then Mark won, and then that happened again. So Mark, what is the strategy to win a game of Bridge City Poker?
I would say the best strategy, the strategy I utilized most, would be just to get good cards. Get the cards that lined up, and then I would say that's the best thing to do. I actually got a chance to play Chimera a couple days after this when I got back, and there is a little bit of that flavor to it. I think Chimera is a little more stripped down. Even though Chimera is the way that you play cards can be a little difficult to really internalize initially, even that was a little more clear, a little more intuitive than I felt Bridge City Poker was. That may come with more games of it, but yeah, initially, especially with the fact that I was able to sort of run out my cards almost immediately through no fault of anybody else, sort of left a bad taste in at least my mouth when it came to Bridge City Poker. But yeah, I could accept the fact that upon more plays, there'd be more to explore.
I remember having like one very clear like point of frustration with this game, which was on one of those tricks where Mark had played, his final hand. I beat his hand. Poker style, I had a better hand than Mark did. The game has poker in the name, and yet I did not stop Mark from winning with my better poker hand, which is straight up garbage.
I want to play more of this, honestly. But it's not as immediately interesting as some of the other stuff that we've played, and I think it's for a specific, more hardcore group of trick takers, which is actually what I thought I fit into, So I thought I was one guy, and then this game taught me that I'm not that guy, if that makes sense to anyone listening. If you think you're the guy, play Bridge City Poker, and then you might be brought down a peg or two. You may have noticed that my pride has been gone this episode.
So another game that we played later in the weekend, and this is one actually that we had been sitting on for a while. Callan has a copy of this, and it kind of very briefly ends up in my hands for a bit, but we never got a chance to play it. So we broke out the copy at SHUX of Cubitos. This is a press your luck racing game that has sort of like a dice building component to it. So, the premise of the game is very simple. You have a little racer that you're trying to race around the track, but the way you do that is through rolling a bunch of dice. Now, the dice mostly have misses on them, blank faces, and once you get past a certain threshold, if you roll all misses on your dice, you basically lose your turn. All those dice move at your discard, you get a little bit of a concession, but otherwise you're waiting around for your next turn. But if you choose to stop, then you get to do all the movement on your dice, you get to buy more dice, you get to do some other fun little things, and all of this in service of building up the idealized pool of dice, which is going to do what it can to get you bigger and better dice, move you further, get you onto some of these bonuses. And that balance of feeling a little bit like a deck builder, feeling like, a racing game, and also having this very solid push your luck core, because you're throwing enough dice and the faces on them are uneven enough that you can never really quite hone in on what the probabilities of anything you're doing are. It kind of just feels a little bit more by gut. It's like, yeah, I'm bound to be fine if I just throw these dice one more time, and then most of the time you're absolutely not. If you're me, at least, you're absolutely not. You're just busting constantly. So yeah, I thought this was cute. I think the presentation is bright and colorful. It also has the thing where there is a lot of variance to each of these little dice, very much like Quacks of Quedlinburg, which is probably its closest comparison. You are playing with a different set of these dice in every game, which will vary the powers that they have. I thought this was cute. I thought this was lovely.
I think for me, what's interesting is that everyone who plays Quacks talks to me about this like indescribable feeling of fun that they have when they play it. And I'm like, well, what about this? That's annoying. And they're like, no, the game is just fun. And I don't, for whatever reason, feel that way about Quacks of Quedlinburg. I enjoy it, but it doesn't have that indescribable fun factor. And I think Cubitos, for me, definitely does, because it's a race game. Because, you're not just racing for points. You're literally on a track trying to pass each other, and you're chucking a ton of dice. I think that strategically, I felt a little bit more in control of what was happening with my deck, quote unquote, in Quacks of Quedlinburg compared to what's going on in Cubitos, where you're just rolling a ton of dice. But just in terms of a game that I feel if I had set up, I could probably convince some randos to try it, and they would just have this fun, indescribable fun time rolling a bunch of dice and sort of trying to race around the track quickly. I think races are inherently fun. Rolling dice is inherently fun, and somehow this combines in a way that for me is superior to Quacks, but I again it's not my favorite genre of game either way.
I would say that the biggest hit against Cubitos for me personally is that it also does pitch itself a little bit against Quest for El Dorado as a deck building race game, and I think Quest for El Dorado is better, it's cleaner, and it just feels more satisfying. I feel it often is closer. I feel you have a lot more control over what you're building, insofar as
it's not the game's fault that I was so good at Cubitos.
That's fair. Mark, am I coming on Blood Rage?
Yeah. To start off our very last day at SHUX, we got a big game of Blood Rage going. So this was...
Well, let's not talk about this.
The three of us. It was listener Leland, who is on our highest tier of our Patreon, the only true and living fan. So he was part of that. And none other than Mr. Mike Walker from So Very Wrong About Games. So this was a game of Blood Rage. I have played Blood Rage a couple times here and there on BGA, but I forget how fun it is to play in person. I really enjoyed our play of it, even though Walker, who evidently has been playing Blood Rage morning, noon, and night on BGA and has honed his skills to a fine point, absolutely destroyed us. But still, just the card draw, the draft, trying to figure out some fun synergies between the cards, the fights, the trash talking, all made for a really fun experience for me, at least.
It's funny. I think that, again, I had the worst score. Walker almost lapped me. He did not. I want to be very clear. He did not lap me in the score track. But I believe we were within 5 points of me being lapped. It was just I bought an expensive card that had to do with my leader in Age 1, right? Lost a battle that the other person shouldn't have even been in because it didn't get them enough. And that my first turn. And then in the second age, I brought that leader back out early, thinking that before everyone had built up their stuff, I could get a few little things started. I lost that first combat, And I think that I was literally out of the game from that moment onward. Again, I'm not that good at Blood Rage, but like it felt like in a 5-player game, occasionally like whoever didn't get hit was just sort of eking out ahead. I do think that I tend to be too militaristic in sort of all walks of life and in Blood Rage. But it's like I actually think I've been the highest on Blood Rage of this group, and playing at this time, I was just like squinting my head at what was going on. I was like, okay, who's going to get the throne room card and double their quests and killjoy everyone's fun? You know, who's going to get the card that no one saw? Who's going to use the Loki strategy, and who's going to stop who? Again, it's a phenomenal game for having such good drafting that also, you know, you have a lot of agency in the execution phase. But I don't know for me anymore how I'm feeling about it.
I had similarly mixed feelings about this session in particular because the last few games of mine of Blood Rage have been online, whether that's through Tabletop Simulator or, you know, the excellent Steam app. But I had sort of come down a little bit based on those plays, and I think to Mark's point, like playing it again in person, like did reinvigorate. Oh yeah, I remember why this is good. All of these games come alive more in person. But I did have one moment, you know, when it became apparent that you could tell what Walker was trying to do, and someone or everyone really just had to step in and stop them. But the game doesn't really accommodate for you hate drafting because your hand selection is so small, and each of those cards is so meaningful that it kind of felt really hard to justify pulling a card away from Walker if it meant hurting your own tableau, especially if you didn't know that everyone else at the table was going to like join you in that effort, you know? So that was the part that sort of left me a little bit cold. But I had a great time with this, for sure. Certainly better than most of my recent games of Blood Rage.
We ended the con, we're near the end, with a bad game of Wind the Film /Photograph. I think that, for me, it proved that the game is brilliant and that you must be brilliant and on your toes to play it, because I just screwed up at every possible turn in this game. But I was excited to show Mark, who had not played Photograph /Wind the Film. And I'm excited to see that many people have been picking this one up. Saw that Before You Play picked it up at Essen, and Monique was excited about playing it after me forcing her to play it at Gen Con at 2 a.m. So I'm excited for sort of a new group of people to experience this game. Mark, did you have a good time playing Photograph?
I really liked it. Yeah, I liked it a lot. As you guessed, it's like that sort of hand management game of that is just right up my alley. That like tight decisions, like every card, every action you do feels very consequential. Yeah, I absolutely loved it.
I noticed, Neelan, you didn't bring up how good I did at Arboretum, where I redeemed myself for years of being bad at that game, and I destroyed you.
I figured my destroying you at Photograph was enough to cancel out either of our wins, so I just thought I'd just let it lie. But you know, if you did want to
use the Jesus strategy in Arboretum to win. Okay? Don't make funny, complicated patterns. One row this way, one row up and down. Keep it simple, stupid, and just believe, and you can win.
It was pretty funny. It's like you look at everyone's very complicated Arboretum grids, and like Kellen making no secrets about how he's planning on scoring his Arboretum at the end of the game, and end up doing very well with it. But yeah, I think that is going to round out a small selection of the games that we played at SHUX. A lot of stuff that we were happy to have played with listeners of the show. Always a pleasure to meet up and play games with all of y'all. Always a pleasure to see our friends at So Very Wrong About Games and shut up and sit down. A fun weekend was had. We had played a lot of great games. We spoke about some more of them on last week's episode with Tom Brewster. But otherwise, that's going to wrap it up for our look back on the SHUX Expo. Thank you for listening. You can find us on all of our social media on Twitter. You can find us on Facebook. You can find us on Instagram. We're everywhere. We also have a very active Discord community, which is sort of an online chat room that you can use on your phone or on your browser. That is at boardgamebarrage.com/Discord. Awesome way if you just want to like chat with us, chat with a lot of very, very active, very passionate members of the Board Game Barrage community, where they're just either setting up online games or talking about the games that they've been playing. Otherwise, thank you all for listening. Thank you, as always, to Heart Society for our intro and outro music. What's in your mind, kid? And goodbye.
Goodbye.
I think we outlasted the band, Heart Society.
I think we did it a while ago.
Good night.
We're going to be their legacy.
That's right.
Yeah. a la Galaxy Trucker. I can't say that word either. Galaxy Trucker. You have...
Speaking of games from SHUX, played Blood Rage with a listener and the other pod boys from Board Game Barrage. It's a thing.
Stop making pod boys a thing.
Pod boys is going to be a thing.
Oh, man.
It fills me with too much giddiness.
Damn right, Walker. Pod boys?